Good afternoon, everyone. For the record, my name is Tanya Fernandez Anderson, Boston City Councilor for District 7. I am the chair of the Boston City Council Committee on Ways and Means. I am joined by my colleagues, Councilor President Flynn, Councilor Lara, Councilor Durkin, Councilor Braden. This public hearing is being recorded and live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-TV. It will be rebroadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, Verizon Fios Channel 964. We will take public testimony at the end of this hearing or in the order that the lead sponsor chooses to. If you wish to testify via Zoom, please email shane.pack@boston.gov to sign up. When you are called, please state your name and affiliation and/or residence, and limit your comments to no more than 2 to 3 minutes to ensure that all comments can be heard. You may also submit written testimony by email to ccc.wm@boston.gov. That's ccc.wm@boston.gov. Today's hearing is on dockets 1722, order for hearing to discuss a guaranteed basic income program for families living below the poverty line in the city of Boston. This matter was sponsored by Councilor Kendra Lara and was referred to the committee on November 15, 2023. Today, I am joined by administration, representatives on the panel. Jessica. Okay, that's the next panel. Our first panel, I know Chief Idowu and Chief of Economic OEOI, something like that. Thank you. Economic Opportunity and Inclusion.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Welcome. And sir, sorry, can you give me my notes a little bit scrambled? Can you give me your name for the record and your title?
Yeah, Elijah Miller, Director of Policy for the Office of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion.
Mr. Miller, thank you and welcome. I'll first go to the lead sponsor for comments, then to my colleagues, and then straight to the panels for your presentation, if there's one. If not, to questions. I think I will lean on to the co-sponsor, my colleague, Councilor Lara, to sort of lead this and how you want to have this conversation today. Councilor Lara, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the members of the administration for being here with us today, but also for all of your work, both in collaboration with my office and other community members for the last year on this project. This is something that is not only very near and dear to my heart, but I think incredibly important if we're going to create a city where all of our children and all of our family can thrive, particularly creating a pathway up from poverty for our most vulnerable constituents. So I'm happy that we are here today. This hearing is in particular to receive an update or to just hear direction and thoughts from the cabinet about what we are thinking in terms of a universal or a guaranteed basic income pilot here in the city of Boston. Where are we with the proposal that was set forth by the coalition that we worked with, and just wanting to hear from you what has changed or evolved in the last year.
Thank you, Councilor Lara. Council President Flynn, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to Councilor Lara for sponsoring this hearing as well. It is important for residents at all income levels to have a chance to succeed and thrive, and I believe that the best way to achieve this is through a good paying job and career with benefits that can support a family, and to ensure that all residents and families have access to good jobs and good wages. Here are my concerns. We are in uncertain economic times. Businesses are concerned about our economic outlook. We have vacant office and commercial spaces that have not recovered from the pandemic. There are also concerns about the commercial tax base for our city. Our city needs to ensure that we provide basic city services and public safety for our constituents. I also believe that our city needs to prioritize paying better salaries for our city employees in order for us to find and maintain talent. All of this needs funding. We would need significant funds for universal basic income program. At this time, I don't think we should experiment with the program in these uncertain economic times. We also need to address our existing responsibilities before starting with the new program that would require a tremendous amount of funding. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Council President Flynn. Councilor Durkin, you have the floor.
Thank you so much to the chair and Councilor Laura for convening this hearing and focusing our attention on this critical issue. The sheer number of Bostonians that are experiencing direct or indirect poverty is truly heartbreaking, and I'm grateful to leaders across the city and the administration who have been contributing to a general guaranteed basic income coalition, and I'm excited to hear about the pilot that's being developed. But I'm really here to listen, to speak more about, and to hear more about what we could envision in the city. And I know there are some nonprofits doing really great work around guaranteed income. I got the chance to attend an event for Camp Harborview, and hearing what they're doing on guaranteed basic income and for their families is just really exciting. So I'm excited to hear more about what we can do here in the city of Boston, and excited to have this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Durkin. Councilor Braden, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll keep my comments brief. Thank you for the lead sponsor on this conversation this afternoon. I think the guaranteed basic income is a very impactful tool that we should certainly investigate to see how we can move the dial for those folks who live on the poverty line and really struggle to make ends meet. I think there's some very, very encouraging results from the project in Chelsea that indicated that with that little bit of extra income, families were not accumulating medical debt, and they were having more food, able to put more food on the table, and just it was a life changer for them. So it's very, very opportune time to look at this and see if such a model would be helpful here in the city of Boston. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Braden. Councilor Murphy?
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief also. Thank you to the sponsor for bringing this forward, and here to listen and learn. So thank you to the panelists, and I'm ready for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Braden. Councilor Lara, how may I best structure this for a productive conversation? Tell me how you want to do this. Do we want to?
I think the most useful.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Councilor Lujan, apologies. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to sponsor Councilor Lara for this hearing. I think guaranteed income is, as we've seen in other cities like Chelsea, like Stockton, like the Mayors for Guaranteed Income around the country, coalitions come together, is just really impactful if we're trying to get folks out of poverty. Giving them money to do so in a manner that is non-paternalistic is the best way forward. And so I'm encouraged by the results that we've seen, the data on this. The Kennedy School recently did a symposium on guaranteed income, and so I think that there's a lot of energy and will for us to look at the potential of creating more floors for people. And what's really encouraging by a lot of the studies that people are using it for things that are the biggest parts of their expenses, like rent, like food, like transportation. And so I'm encouraged by having this conversation and hope that we can move the needle. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Lujan. Councilor Ari, you were saying?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the most useful would be to hear from the administration, their presentation or their direction, and then take questions from panelists before we move on.
Awesome. Councilor Coletta, we were giving brief introductions. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the sponsors for pushing this forward. I am excited about this conversation. I do look forward to getting into the details. We all know that UBI is not a new or radical concept. There was a pilot program, I'm sure has been mentioned in Chelsea, and there's been some really interesting data that has come forth in that. When we give people the dignity of choice, they typically choose to survive and to pay down debt. And so I would love to understand what Boston is thinking, what conversations have already taken place. I do think that there's a lot of folks that are just surviving and on the brink, and this could be a way to give them relief. So I am looking forward to this conversation, and thank you again to the chair and to the makers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Coletta. Chief Ito, you have a hard stop, and I understand it may not be so hard. Exactly how much time do we have with you?
Well, I was seeking to leave at 3 for a service that's taking place later in the afternoon.
No room for conversation there, so.
No, we
exactly at 3. No, I know.
Yeah, mm-hmm.
I know. I was told. I was saying no room for negotiations there, like to keep you longer.
I think we can play by ear, but I mean, again, we're here to really hear from the advocates and the council body on their thoughts on this topic. So I will try to stay as long as possible.
Okay, thank you so much. That gives us 40 minutes. Could you keep your presentation under 10 minutes?
Oh, we will. You will be satisfied with with our presentation today, because
you,
mostly. Oh, sorry.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank Councilor Lara for and all of those who co-sponsored this hearing order for bringing us together today for this conversation. I will say that, for our purposes in economic opportunity and inclusion, it's important that if we are going to have this term inclusion as part of our name, that we are not only creating programs that people who already have resources can access. It is important to us that every Bostonian is able to survive and thrive here in the city of Boston. And so one of the reasons that we're here today is because this is a particular tool that we are exploring thanks to this being brought by Councilor Lara. Actually, some of the points that Councilor Flynn brought up in terms of the economic uncertainties that we see coming at a head in 2024, the fact that in Boston the BPDA is projecting our population to grow significantly over the next 10 years, the uncertainties on the impact of artificial intelligence on the workforce, thinking of the fact that not only the number of Bostonians, we're at around roughly 18% of Bostonians living in poverty, but there are so many we know anecdotally that are hovering right above the poverty line that if they miss a paycheck this or next week will fall into the category of being part of those Bostonians living in poverty. All of these things combined signal that we as an administration and working with the council and all of our partners in the community must come up with as many tools and resources as possible to support Bostonians to move out of poverty into thriving and to take advantage of every opportunity that's possible here throughout the city. And so we're here today because we've been exploring all of these tools. One of them happens to be the guaranteed income, again, brought to us by Councilor Lara. We see some partners in the room today who have been pushing for this for a very long time. And so, again, here to listen to what a lot of the ideas may be as we think about what a potential program would or could possibly look like here in the city of Boston. I will say that we don't have details of like this is a pilot program of something. We are exploring all possible tools available to help Bostonians, and again, guaranteed income is one such thing that we are exploring, but we do not have a here is a pilot program where it's just one of the things that our policy team is looking into. That being said, it is important to note that the city of Boston does have many resources available in terms of anti-poverty, anti-displacement tools that we're looking to find where our gaps are so that, again, if guaranteed income is a way that we determine with our colleagues here is the way to go, is something that we can look at, as well as other tools that may be available, because we know that there is no silver bullet to solving this problem, but it's going to take a collective effort to address poverty here in the city of Boston, a city of tremendous wealth. So with that being said, I will pause my comments because I'm looking forward to the comments and feedback and reactions of the council, but more so want to make sure we're creating opportunities for those who are here joining us from the advocacy community to hear what their thoughts are that we can take back as we're considering all of our options. With that, I actually want to cede the floor to Elijah Miller, who's our Director of Policy. We are very fortunate to have Elijah as part of our team, and he'll say a little bit about his background and what he's been doing. But Elijah has been leading the work of OEOI to consider a range of options and tools and resources that will support Bostonians. He's also been looking into this particular issue, studying what is happening across the country as we think about what could sustainable, scalable programs look like here in Boston that support Bostonians. So with that, I will cede the floor to Mr. Miller to say a little bit about himself and what we're seeing across the country.
Thank you very much. So, as I mentioned at the top, I am the Director of Policy in the Office of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion. I'm also working on my dissertation on my PhD in Public Policy at Northeastern University, studying the solidarity economy. So I have some familiarity with investigating alternative economic development concepts and frameworks to redress the financial hardship that many families experience and don't get relief from mainstream economic proposals. I would just emphasize or underscore what the chief has said, that we are, investigating how is guaranteed income performing in the pilots that are existing across the country. Many of the findings are still preliminary, so there is a fog over the mechanisms of how exactly people's lives are changed by guaranteed income, and then trying to understand how this one tool could fit into a broader suite that composes a social infrastructure so that people are moving into sustainable economic upward mobility. I think that's all I'll say for my opening.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. I'll go to Councilor Lara first for questions. We now have about 35 minutes with the chief. So, Councilor Lara, if you take all of 8 minutes, then I can divvy up the rest with my colleagues.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you again. I think it has been made very clear, at least to me and to the members of the council today, based on your presentation, that when we're talking about really having an impact on poverty, you're taking a wraparound approach, not just looking at basic income, but you're looking at a multitude of other interventions that could support us in pulling our families out of poverty here in the city of Boston. And I am both grateful and encouraged by that. And because this hearing is about basic income, I want us to talk about basic income as, with the knowledge that this is a part of a larger ecosystem that your office is working on when it comes to targeting poverty. So I just wanted to kind of preface that a little bit. For about 9 months last year, we had a coalition that was made up of my office and a bunch of other city departments that met a couple of times a month to really talk about what a basic income could look like here. Now, you've stated that obviously there is not a pilot because this was just a proposal that we were putting forth to the administration. But for the record, can you talk a little bit about, can you give us a little overview of the proposal as it came out from the coalition? And since then, what parts of the proposal are being considered? I think you've said a couple of things. You've talked about scale. Right? And so, are you considering the scale of that proposal? What are the things that have evolved and changed? Things that you are considering, that you are not considering from the proposal as it was submitted?
Yep. So, just to give a little bit of depth to what the councilor said, our office worked with a number of other departments across the city, such as departments in equity and inclusion, consisting of women's advancement, immigrant advancement, black male advancement, all to evaluate how has guaranteed income impacted the lives of different people with different lived experiences at different stages in their life. And then looking at the pilots across the country to see, what have they done? How have the outcomes fared? Many of the findings are still preliminary, as I mentioned. So, we are evaluating what kind of scope is feasible, What would the costs look like based on that? What do different levels of income mean for families? So what is the difference between receiving $600 a month versus receiving $1,000 a month? What kind of impacts then bleed into the labor market? Are there any impacts on inflation? And many of these questions we don't have answers to yet. We're still looking toward final publications being produced so that if we decide to move forward with any proposal, we are following the best practices out there.
Thank you. So, Chief, do you want to take
Nope, I think that's an accurate
Beautiful.
assessment.
So I can appreciate that. Obviously, I think that it's important to have data. Like you said, a lot of the data that we have is preliminary. I want to, one, congratulate you on working on your dissertation. Solidarity economy is something that is important to me when I think about economic mobility of particularly Black and brown people. And so I want to use the example of Jackson, Mississippi, which is one of the homes of the solidarity economy, where there's been a lot of support there. They've implemented a basic income program where they provided $1,000 a month to Black mothers specifically who are living in extreme poverty in 2020. And what they found in their data was that it helped address racial and gender-based elements of poverty, and the number of households that were preparing the majority of their food at home doubled, and the money was used often to pay off debt. And so although we don't have, that's just one example, right? We have examples of data that has been provided that shows that it had no impact in the workforce, that it had impact on educational attainment for parents, that it impacted the health and the well-being of children when they were being out of poverty. And so I don't want perfect to be the enemy of good. No, we do not have a lot of final data, but we have hundreds of basic income projects, not just in this country, but all across the world where we have preliminary data for. We know that it is effective. We know that there is a positive impact. So I'm curious, is the waiting for the data the thing that is holding us back, or are there other things that are being considered that are slowing down the project of this? Because we had the child tax credit during the pandemic. We saw how many millions of children in this country were brought up out of poverty. When it was removed, we saw how many millions of children. We saw, there was an article that came out a couple of weeks ago that 2.9 million children across the country are living in poverty now, and have actually, in the last 2 years, have started to live in poverty. So this is not an issue that can wait for the timeliness of us. We're going to wait for all of the data to be in front of us, although I do appreciate us having information. There are things that we can do. So can you share a little bit more about what are other things that are stopping us, and what is stopping us from using the preliminary data that we have to do something that might be smaller and more attainable?
I think what's important is that, again, on our side of things, we do not debate at all the merits of a guaranteed income program. Full stop on that. Some of the considerations that we have to think about is whether or not, as was shared publicly, the pilot version of this, we want to make sure that whatever the city of Boston is going to do is going to impact as many people as possible, but also the financial constraints. So thinking of where the money comes from in order for something to be sustainable over a longer period of time. Also considering who are what are the target groups for this? Is this universal basic, meaning everybody, or do we take the approach of targeting, if a program is developed, targeting it towards a specific subset of Bostonians? So I think, again, we come to this hearing today to hear, if there are, we know from your office what the specific details are that you're looking at doing, the 1,000 families under the poverty line, but here to hear from other council colleagues if there are other considerations that we should be thinking about, and also, again, hearing from practitioners in the field if they have feedback that we should be considering and taking back.
Thank you, Chief. And just for the record, what Chief Idowu has referenced is that part of the proposal that we set forth is that it would be targeted, that it would not be universal, but it would be targeted particularly to families who are living below the poverty rate, to help lift families in the city up from poverty. That's definitely what I'm advocating for, particularly if we are just starting. I think that we really want to start off at the people who are being the most deeply impacted and live in poverty here in the city. I have other questions, but I will stop there.
You have 2 minutes.
Oh, perfect. One of the other parts, the Boston Foundation also released a report that talked about what a guaranteed basic income would look like in the city of Boston. Like we said, we were looking at 1,000 families in the city as a possible pilot. And in terms of where the money comes from, because it was a pilot, the proposal outlined that it could possibly be privately funded as a pilot. I understand that in order to make that sustainable, which we want to do, we have to have a more sustainable fountain of financial resources for this to come from. But I want to ask again, in terms of a pilot that could possibly 2-3 years bring 1,000 families in our cities up from poverty, that's not a small impact. Is that something that is still a possibility? Are we only waiting until we have it perfect and fully funded, or are we moving towards possibly having something that's smaller and more sustainable?
Well, I think, again, we want to make sure that we're impacting as many people as possible. And yes, we would need to make sure that we have the dollars available to make that program successful and sustainable. Because any hesitancy on launching a program would be about making sure that whatever we launch is going to have is going to be able to impact people over a longer period of time than after 1 or 2 years cutting the cord because we've run out of funding or because we only planned for a couple of years and then seeing any potential negative impacts following the ending of a program. Again, I think your point is well taken and important that the child tax credit, like poverty dropped in this country as a result of that, and then yanking it away caused folks to fall back into poverty. So I think we do want to take those things into consideration. To your specific question, we absolutely would want to lean on our partners in the philanthropic community to help fund any program.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be key in terms of what we can get done is going to be not just city funds, philanthropic funds, private industry, who benefit from the people of the city and what we've created here to come to their business. And I'm excited actually to hear from the panelists who have been implementing this work to talk about how they've been able to sustain it as well. So thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilor President Flynn, because of the time constraints with Chief Biddle, you only have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chief. Chief, did you have an opportunity yet to talk to the mayor's team, the financial team, about how the city would pay for this?
Well, we haven't brought the proposal to finance so far as I know, only because the consideration that we did look at was if we were to lean on our partners in the philanthropic community. So that and the fact that because we've not built out a pilot program, we don't know what the full cost would be. It would all be dependent on how any program chooses to target the population, how many families or individuals are seeking to impact. So until any proposal exists, we have not yet talked to Chief Grafenberger.
Do you expect to get a report from the city financial team before we go forward in getting their recommendation on what impact this will have on the city's economic future?
I think if a program were to be put together, we would not be able to move forward unless we spoke with our chief financial officer, particularly if it relied on, if the proposal put forward relying on city funds. That being said, I know that we would also want to include projections on the economic impact on Boston overall, that should we provide or create a program like this, what the long-term impact on Boston's economy overall could be by lifting people out of poverty.
Would you also check with the City of Boston Assessing Department to see what impact this may have or may not have on property taxes?
I'm sure that would be part of the consideration, yes, sir.
So are you going in the short term, are you compiling all this information and presenting a report to the City Council so we're able to study this? Well,
this is if we decide to put together a pilot proposal, we'd make sure that all the stakeholders are made aware of what the city is seeking to move forward with.
And if nonprofits do participate in this program, in terms of funding this program, what impact would that have on their payment to the city, the pilot payment? Would that be factored in as a contribution to the residents, to the city of Boston, and does that mean that we would be able to reduce their property tax, or pilot, I should say?
I think that's a great question. I don't have the answer to that question. But, again, as we're developing a program, I think that is a point that we would need to take into consideration if any of our universities or medical institutions put up funding for this. Which is not bad, I will say. We didn't think about them funding, so thank you for the suggestion.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And like you mentioned at the beginning, I support so many different initiatives to keep people out of poverty, as you brought up during your opening statement. But I just want to get more information on this so we can make a better decision. I think you know what my position is on this. And then I guess my last final point is, would you get a chance to talk to Chief Jameson, asking him about his opinion on what impact this may or may not have on Boston's economy and the real estate community, including development, future development in the city?
So what I will say is this: if the administration were to develop a proposal for a guaranteed basic income, this would not just come from my office. This would be a cabinet-wide discussion. I can't see how imaginable it would be that we launch something and not engage our city council colleagues or partners in the community on what something like this could look like. Because if we were to do something in Boston, we'd also want to make sure it's the most comprehensive and impactful program. We can't do that alone.
How long do you think all of this research would take you, Chief?
Well, I think this would happen simultaneous to any consideration of a program. So Elijah from our team has been already exploring a program like this with other city departments, engaging state agencies, because one of the things that you want to avoid is the benefits cliff of, if we're providing this support, of folks then being kicked out of existing programs. So all of these considerations are important, but as Councilor Lara has mentioned, there's an urgency in the administration to address poverty in the city, and this is one such tool that is worthy of consideration. And so, because of that, we're putting in a lot of time on a lot of these different program ideas.
Thank you, Chief. I think my time is up. Thank you for taking my questions.
I apologize. I didn't mean to filibuster.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Council President Flynn. Council Durkin, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Counselor. So I know that there's not a specific proposal on the table, but wanted to talk a little bit more about sort of the basic, the category of folks who would benefit from a program like this in the city, Chief. So I know from the BPDA's statistics that they report a poverty rate of over 18% in the city of Boston. The census is a little under 18%. And the BPDA's report shows that it's a little under 30% of this is impacting children. So we know how just how meaningful this would be to Boston's families. So could you speak, Chief, a little more to the concept of universal basic income and guaranteed basic income, and what why this is something the city has been exploring?
Well, I think I'll have Elijah speak to the specifics of the guaranteed income and how it could benefit specifically Boston residents. But I'll say, generally speaking, it is important to us that everybody have access to opportunities and to the resources needed to thrive in this city. And what is true, unfortunately, for the city of Boston is that there are too many who don't have that access. Many of our residents living in poverty, you mentioned the amount of children living in poverty, but as we think about the growth of our population and the fact that a lot of that growth is going to come from the aging of our population, we have so many seniors that are living in poverty right now as well. And so for me, this particular conversation on guaranteed income, but really generally speaking about how the city approaches poverty, is not just a today issue. This is for the future of the city, 10 years, 20 years, by 2050, we need to address this issue urgently, because what we don't want to see happen is we go from a population of roughly 670,000 to 800,000, and all we do is further increase the number of people living in poverty, as opposed to addressing the issue urgently and head on, and making sure that as people are either being born in the city or moving to the city, that they're automatically getting pathways to economic mobility, rather than starting off, below the poverty line, which is not what any of us wants. But to the specifics of guaranteed income, I'll not hog the microphone and turn to Mr. Miller.
Thank you. And I'll just add, guaranteed income as an economic concept borrows much of its philosophy from universal basic income, where the premise is unconditional, routine cash payments to families, individuals, with the idea that households essentially have a liquidity crisis and they simply need more cash to become productive, engage in more gainful employment, and see the kinds of self-sustaining economic condition that you want to see in society. Guaranteed income enters the picture where universal basic income is too expensive to finance. So guaranteed income similarly strives for routine cash payments that are often unconditional or with very limited conditions, but it introduces some kind of either means testing or targeting certain demographics because of just the practicality of it's very expensive to deliver cash payments at scale. So different pilots across the country have focused on different demographics. Some of them may be seniors or disabled populations, where there is not a great expectation that these people can get into the labor market. Some of the pilots focus on families with children, often motivated by the idea that childcare is so expensive that the cash assistance helps people take care of children in a way that is additional to any kinds of voucher-based or other modes of child care assistance that a locality may have. And often the goal is get people the cash that they need on a regular basis, where it's predictable, it's reliable, and it allows them to manage and improve their financial situation.
Thank you. And I've seen how critical programming and honestly, there's a lot of groups in my district who are speaking to food insecurity, and obviously what we're dealing with here in Boston and around the country is just skyrocketing prices of groceries, and I've seen in my I think it's helpful to zoom out and get very specific, because I've volunteered with Fenway Cares in my district and seen what it looks like to have need. And I've also seen what it looks like when the truck doesn't come that day, and how many people are, there waiting for folks to have access to resources. And I know that that GBI could be a salve for what we're dealing with less logistics of food insecurity programs that are working in the city. So I thank you guys for exploring it, and look forward to more conversation. Thank you. Sorry for going over time.
Councillor Brayden, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think from my understanding of the Chelsea program, it's very targeted. We're really, and they were very mindful to not put folks who were relying on subsidies for housing or whatever, who are in receipt of government assistance, that they wouldn't put that in jeopardy. Do you have any information about that and how that might work out? Because if you raise somebody's income and then they become ineligible for assistance with childcare or assistance with housing, then it's a retrograde problem.
Yeah. There are different techniques that have been used, but generally you have to have some partnership with the state or the Commonwealth in Massachusetts working alongside the Department of Transitional Assistance, and perhaps partnership with federal agencies like Housing and Urban Development to try to protect as many benefits that people may already be receiving for as long as you can, so that as people are increasing their income, they don't get penalized and then demotivated, or at worst see rent increases or more food insecurity. So it takes partnership between different levels of government to have a process that makes a guaranteed income part of a holistic solution to their financial challenges.
So really that's a pretty important piece of the puzzle, to make sure we don't jeopardize folks who are already getting some assistance. Yeah.
Very important.
And so in terms of your exploring this possibility with, have we talked to folks at the state level about any of these challenges that we might face in implementing the Guaranteed Basic Income Programme?
I've had some conversations with the Commonwealth's Department of Transitional Assistance, and they have seemed amenable to this idea of piloting something where they protect people against a benefits cliff effect. This was during the previous administration, and I'll just add, there's a dynamic where personnel makes a difference, and this is not just with the state, but then looking at federal partners like with HUD, who may have different views about what they want to allow in terms of strictly enforcing certain benefits cliffs.
I think what's important is that, if the city were to build out a program, we would need the support of our colleagues at the state and federal level here to lobby at the state and federal level to make sure that whatever program is launched has that full support, because we want to make sure that if a program is put together, that it's inclusive of as many people as possible, and that having existing benefits will not then exclude you from participation.
And I think that applies to childcare and the whole gamut of support that we provide for low-income community. And again, I think the issue with regard to elders and seniors who are living on some incredibly low income in many cases, again, every demographic has a slightly different challenge, and it's certainly worth digging in and getting into the weeds on this to make it work and not put people in jeopardy. But thank you, Madam Chair. That's all I have.
Thank you, Councilor Braden. Councilor Murphy?
Thank you. Thank you for the conversation, which obviously is just starting. We're at the very beginning of this. Similar to some questions that have already been asked, but the thoughts I have right now are, you just mentioned the benefit cliff, but then there's also the sustainability cliff, right? Like, how long can we afford it? And you mentioned partnerships, and I know Councilor Flynn mentioned maybe it's colleges and museums, and then it's in a shift in what they're already giving as a benefit. So there'll be a lot of not just data, but kind of unintended consequences sometimes, right? And we have to think about those also. And one of them that was mentioned, the benefit cliff, and you talked about partnerships at the state and federal level. And when you talked about the partnerships, is that requesting or asking them to hold off on limits or not enforce what's already considered income levels, right? Because then I'm just picturing that it's going to put more people in a position that then may, right? So being poor is hard. Being poor is something that I hope that we all agree that we would use our power on this council to make sure that we can get the most people out of poverty that we can with any tools we have, but to also make sure, thinking about how do we do that, and then who will we be targeting? Obviously, young children, we saw through the pandemic, something I knew being a classroom teacher for over 20 years, that most of the families that have free reduced lunch, that thank goodness now Boston for many years has offered it to everyone, school was the place where they got most of their meals, right? So when school shut down, we saw this huge food insecurity family-wide. But we also have seniors, right? And so if we're targeting just young families, what about our seniors who are on a fixed income? Food's going up, gas is going up. Are we also thinking about making sure we're capping like property taxes for them so they're not displaced or they're not also finding themselves in a housing crisis situation? So just lots of questions that we have to talk through, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the advocates who I know have kind of worked through this already in other towns and neighborhoods, but making sure that we're as we help one group, that we're not hurting another, and we're making sure that with like even opera funding, when the money's gone, that was a lot of the conversation about when we gave some of the opera funding to different organizations or the ESSER funding that the schools know to really be fiscally responsible and honest with people, like this is a temporary thing. At some point, the money, at least this source of the money, is going to run out, and if we don't have other sources, we may have to end this benefit. So I'm happy to be here at the beginning of the conversation, and we'll be with you along the way. So no direct questions, just comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Murphy. Councilor Jen?
Thank you to administration. Thank you for being here. Thank you for providing your insight. I think, again, guaranteed income is important for providing an income floor for families, and I think it requires incredible partnership at the local, state, and federal level to actually see it become a sustainable part of how we address issues of poverty. I don't know if we've seen a lot of pilots, but I'd love to learn more either from you, from the advocates of places that have made it permanent, and if there are places that have made it permanent, whether they've done that through higher tax rates or higher I think there are different ways. I have all these ideas of how we fund things and how we don't fund things in the city of Boston in general, and I'll leave that for another time. I think that oftentimes where there's will to pay for things, we can find it. But I guess a question that I have is that one: have we seen it made permanent in any jurisdiction? And if so, do you know the mechanism by which they've made it permanent?
Well, I don't want to be wrong. But I'm going to...
You're going to punt?
I will probably be proven wrong.
All right.
But so far as I know...
Throwing y'all the football.
I mean, so far as I know, no one's done it permanently. Mm. Exactly. So
okay.
no one's done it permanently. And, I would gather that some of the reason is on the financial sustainability. Mm-hmm. Again, our colleagues will share a bit more, and I know that the research that Elijah's been doing will help answer that question, but I don't think anyone's done it permanently.
Yeah, and I think part of it is it requires a lot of political will on the national level. When Andrew Yang brought this to the national conversation back in 2020, here I was working for Senator Warren on her presidential campaign, and my mother was talking about how Andrew Yang and this great idea of UBI. So I think there's a lot of really great energy and people who care deeply about resolving poverty in our cities, and then this is a really important way of doing that. Short of the model of like municipalities, for example, finding room in their budget to make this a permanent solution, there are, I think I heard Councilor Durkin mention this when I was walking in, there's Camp Harborview, there's United South End Settlements, there's, I was at Bright Horizons, they're interested in a guaranteed income program. Is there a way that the city could partner with organizations that are already have some sort of guaranteed income model, or want to do some guaranteed income model that could maybe be cost effective for the city, but could also, these are organizations that are already targeting people or who already know are working with communities that or families are living in poverty and people with young children. So I'm wondering if there's a way of partnering with organizations that are doing this work or that want to continue doing this work, that we could have you explored that as a model.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, again, as I said earlier, like I can't envision the city developing anything without talking to partners in the nonprofit community who have been doing this or have been thinking about doing it. And so, whether it's a partnership where everything is coming under one umbrella, or, we're finding ways to support what other people are doing, I think all of it has to be explored, because the thing that's true about the different groups you mentioned as well is that they are all targeting different pockets of the population.
But all pockets of poverty, which is important.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think, to answer your question succinctly, yes, anything that exists would have to function through a partnership with the folks that you just mentioned and many others in the nonprofit world.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Councilor Coletta?
Thank you both so much for being here and for your work. I understand that there's no real proposal to discuss, but we are here to influence the framework of the blueprint that comes next in these conversations, and I really look forward to listening to you all and your work over in Cambridge and some of our sister cities. But again, I just want to reiterate, this is not, I'm going to be very careful with my words, because this is a lifeline, and I think what you'll get from folks is that this is a handout, and there's data now to back up the claim that this is a lifeline to many families. That's spent on diapers, formulas, paying down debt, which is a lifeline for many people. And it is a temporary tool of economic mobility. I am interested to understanding what the state sustainability will be and how we can utilize our budget or private or philanthropic partners. I do just want to call out the fact that we were able to do this on a smaller scale, and so we have a blueprint of a blueprint. During COVID, as part of the mitigation package for Suffolk Downs, largest land redevelopment in the history of Boston, we were able to get $400,000 from HYM, which is a private partner. And what ended up emerging from all of that was a beautiful consortium of community partners who knew families, children, seniors better than anybody, and they were able to get that money in their hands quickly. And we came up with an application process that I'm happy to provide to you or to the chair or to the makers that took the money, gave it to GBLS, and gave it to the East Boston Social Center. I hope that they make it here and provide their testimony, as well as the East Boston YMCA. What we were able to just simply ask for, again, making it as less burdensome as possible, was just basic proof of wages, government benefits, Social Security, child support, unemployment benefits, and that was just to verify their income. If they had zero income, they just had to certify by signing a statement that they had no source of income. Again, super easy. GBLS could look into it if they wanted to. And then the only thing that they were required to present was an evidence of need, such as rental arrears, past due utility bills, childcare expenses or medical expenses. If they need money for food, they self-certified by signing a letter that they just needed food. And then upon proof of the submission, they would just provide $1,000 to the resident. And what we did was develop a partnership with the East Boston Social Center and the YMCA to be able to take in and look over the administrative intake and processes to no cost of their own. They really rallied for the community, but that would be something to consider. But we leaned on them to identify the families. And like I said, they know their families better than anybody. And they were trusted community partners in all of this. And so we have an application here. Again, it was trying to be as less burdensome as possible to the families, but it is just, again, a small blueprint of what is possible here in Boston through private money. And so I just wanted to call that out as something to look at. But I think to Councilor Louis-Jean's point, leaning on community partners that are already there is going to be key in all of this. We can't do everything. So I think having community organizations there at the table is going to be necessary as we move forward.
Thank you for that, Councilor. That is an important piece of feedback for us to leave with, that, if anything is developed, making sure that the boots on the ground aren't just city folks, but rather folks that live in the communities that we're trying to impact. So I take that back with us. I do want to say, again, supporting the merits of that are under consideration today. Councilor Louis-Jean mentioned Andrew Yang, and I want to do a blast from the past and bring us all the way back to 1967 when Martin Luther King was talking about, but to your point, this is something the country has talked about before but not really followed through on. And so I will say that what I myself am happy about, and again, thank you to Councilor Lara for introducing this and providing these different proposals to our team to explore and look at and work with us on, is the fact that we are not really talking about. I know you mentioned that some people mention this as like a handout, but the vast majority of people are not framing it in that context, which is a huge shift from how we've talked about this across the country. Even when Andrew Yang brought it up, that was part of the problem, that, why should we give a handout to folks, bootstraps and all that mess. But rather now, in 2023, completely different conversation. The conversation is now shifted to what's happened for the last hour. How do you pay for it? Who gets to participate, et cetera. We're not busy debating about whether or not the program should exist, but thinking about strategies for making it sustainable. So I appreciate all the feedback that we got today.
Thank you. And if I could just add one more thing, I think I am in favor of the means test for our most vulnerable, so our children, families, seniors. And I also just want to call out the fact that during this particular program, we made sure that documentation status wasn't a part of any paperwork, and then also protecting the privacy of the individuals too was something that we were very focused in on and prioritized. But I do think that there is some room here for undocumented folks who don't get federal assistance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Coletta. I have a comment / some questions to go on record. I'm happy if you can submit it by email or later. In District 7, there's also an effort similar to what Councilor Coletta has mentioned, that community benefits is used for not a universal basic income, but that is some sort of supplemental to small businesses, or if you're an entrepreneur trying to open a brick and mortar, or ways of developing other facilities that increase quality of life in the district, then you could qualify to apply to this nonprofit that the community members have put together. And then with the support of city officials or state, that there's community benefits mitigated, along with a program sort of partnering with a DIFS program to do that on the other end as well. But my questions, I guess, are more general. If you have already worked on this or have done your research, to what point how far have you gotten? So in terms of specifically, the expectations or objectives of expectations for universal basic income, how far have you gotten with that exploration? And program design, how far have you gotten with that? Are there eligibility criteria or determinations? Have you thought about it at all? I know we talked about seniors, we talked about, especially with District 7, I know that children or younger people and seniors' income both align in terms of their MI, both being around 30 to 40%, average income being $34,000. So it would make sense to target, right, both populations, the older and the younger. And I guess funding and sustainability, as you mentioned, why do something for a year or two? Why not be more intentional and really put in the work to ensure sustainability, whether or not it's the long-term sustainability plan with philanthropic agencies or organizations. And then, of course, impact assessment. Have you looked into how will the success of the program impact or be measured? Have we thought about it? How far have you gotten in that? And as well as metrics that will be used to determine effectiveness of the basic income in elevating poverty. And as well, of course, the piece that, of course, community is very interested in is community engagement, and what would that look like in terms of including and engaging community in this process. And I yield my time there because I know that I had promised to lead sponsor 5 more minutes before you left, and I know just out of courtesy, it is 3:06. Is it okay if we have 5 minutes of your time? Yeah. Thank you so much.
And I'll just do a quick 20, well, I shouldn't say, every time I say quick, then I go over. So I'll just say that I heard like really 2 really major questions come out of that. So what I'll say is, When I hear how far along are we, I think what I can infer from that is really how close are we to creating a program? Because it's like, I don't know how else to answer that except to say that, we do not have a pilot program put together. But the purpose of these conversations and what we've received from Councilor Lara's office and what we're hearing today is to help us think about what a robust program could look like. Because even if the city decides not to launch something in the shape of what we've talked about today, it's important that we have something readily available in case of, of something drastic happening. Because I see a program like this as a safety net for many of our residents. And so it's important that we at least have something, some concept available. So we've done a lot of research. Elijah here, like has been mentioned, has talked to a lot of different departments over many, many months. As the councilor mentioned, there were regular conversations between my office, her office, and other departments on thinking about what a program could look like. I would say that we are not at the point of answering some of the major questions on, the target population, the funding, what that number looks like, the raised goal. Those are things that we are still fleshing out. But again, important to, state that, we want to have a suite of things, of ways to address poverty as opposed to only focusing on one program. I know that this hearing is just about guaranteed income, but I'm just stating for the public purposes that this is one tool that we are looking at in addition to many others that currently exist and others that we may want to exist in the future. So how far along are we? Lots of conversations have been had. I feel pretty confident we have a lot of the information that would be necessary for putting together something, but we're not yet at the point of here's a pilot program. I know that's not a satisfactory answer, but just to say that there have been a lot of conversations, and time is of the essence as to what the councilor has mentioned. So
I think it just presents an opportunity to continue the work that you've already mentioned, and I think that wherever you are in the process or how much work you've done with Councilor Lara's office, we could always take it to a working session. I would yield to my colleague to advise on how she wants to proceed. But this is obviously a wonderful opportunity, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with you.
Same. Thank
Councilor
you.
Lara, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I definitely will not need 5 minutes. I don't have any questions, but I want to make sure that I state something now that we've had this conversation before members of the administration leave. There are two things that are persisting in our conversation today. One of them is, how do we pay for it? Where does it come from? How do we sustain this? And I want to take a moment because I think that as I keep hearing us talk about the cost and the expense of pulling people out of poverty, I want us to think about what is the expense of not pulling people out of poverty and what does that cost our city, right? Poverty is associated with various health risks, heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, cancer, asthma, low educational attainment, and so on and so forth. And so it's not a matter of what we're paying. We're already paying. We're already paying the cost of poverty. It's about making a decision how we want to pay it. Are we going to pay it with our financial resources, or are we going to pay it with the negative outcomes of our most vulnerable people, of our children, of our families, of our seniors? I also do not want us to downplay the possible impact of a pilot. We are talking about sustainability as if a pilot is somehow less impactful than having something that is more permanent. It's not. ARPA money was not permanent money, and we didn't send it back because we were only going to have it for so many years. I want us to think about a single mother who is going to have a guaranteed basic income for 2 years, and how that might give her the ability to work less hours and go to school and get an associate degree. And even though the basic income pilot is going to end after 2 years, she has now created a situation for herself and her family where she has access to a higher paying job and more benefits. I want us to think about families and the benefit that they will have, even if it's just for a 2-year pilot. It isn't 2 years, 3 years is not nothing. It has the ability to give families the breathing room to set themselves up to be successful. We can see long-term transformative change from something as small as a 2-year or a 3-year pilot. And so I want it to be sustainable. I want us to think about how to make this I want us to think about how to make this permanent, and I don't want us to think of a pilot as being somehow less than or less impactful than having something that's longer term. And I want us to really think about what the cost of not doing this is. We can say it's going to cost too much money to bring people out of poverty. Well, what is it going to cost us? How are the people in our city, the almost 30% of children who are living below the poverty line, the almost 20% of people in the city who are living below the poverty line, how are they going to have their best chance to thrive in the city if we are not investing in them? And if that many people in our city who are majority women, majority black and brown people, if they do not have equitable access to economic mobility because they're not ready for a space grant or to apply for a first-time home buyers class, then what kind of city are we going to be 10, 15, 20 years from now if they're not able to access? Because they're not ready. Some people are ready to move on to there. We have to think about how a rising tide lifts all boats. And so I understand the considerations. I want to encourage more urgency, and I want to encourage some faith in the ability to have an impact on people and families by doing something small as giving them a guaranteed basic income, even if it's just for 2 years. So thank you all for all of your hard work. Thank you, Councilor Anderson, for giving me the time to make those comments.
Thank you. After Councilor Lara gave us all those capitalist conundrums to think about, I look forward to continuing the conversation with you. Thank you for being here. We'll now be switching to our panel, but wanted to ask you if you wanted to make final comments before you exit it, as well as offering someone from your office to be listening in either remotely or in person.
Well, I'll certainly be tuning in on my phone, heading, and again, I apologize, but I think I might be seeing some of you all later at the wake for John Walsh, and so I'm heading to be with the family for a bit before other family obligations. I guess the only other comments from me are just to say that in full agreement with the comments that were just made. What is important to us, though, is that we're thinking holistically about all the different ways to address poverty. This is one of the tools that we're exploring, and for us it is important that we're thinking about the sustainability of this, because what we don't want to see happen is that one of the tools we're using suddenly is yanked away. Now, that is to say that that is not what is, if the city decides to launch something, we're going to find the money, absolutely. And all of the different folks that were brought up today are folks that we'll be reaching out to, whether they're in the philanthropic community. Councilor Flynn brought up the meds and eds, and I will just say, it's in their best interest to support some tool of this kind, because in addition to the health factors, it also is what prevents a lot of people from furthering their education, et cetera. So everyone benefits from us attacking and eliminating poverty. And so we are looking forward to this conversation, continuing with our council colleagues on guaranteed income, as well as the suite of other things that the city is already providing, that is already in our budget, and things that we could invest more in to address the problem, knowing that guaranteed income is not the only solution, but is a tool that we can use as part of a broad sweep of things to address poverty in this city. That we believe that if Boston were to do it, we always do it well, and we'll be looking forward to, should Boston consider this being a model for the country and the world. So, thank you again, Councilor, for bringing this issue to us.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Elijah.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Thank you all very much. Honored to be a part of this conversation.
Thank you. Do our panels, are some present in person? Please beware. Thank you. I found it. Can we have Jessica Ridge, Josh Waxman, Michael Scarlett, Allison Kroner, and Turan Dorsey? Turan's not here. Welcome. I'll be just asking you for a brief introduction, and then you can go straight into your presentation, starting from...
Sure. Do you want us to each introduce first and then individually?
Yes, please.
go? Okay. I'm Jessica Ridge from Up Together.
Thank you.
I'm Josh Waxman from Camp Harbor Review.
I'm Allison Kroner-Barron from Cambridge Community Foundation.
And I'm Michael Scarlett from the City of Cambridge.
Considering that you're from different places, did you all need approximately 3 to 5 minutes each?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Who's ready to start?
I'm going to start us off.
Okay. Welcome.
Thank you.
Jessica, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'm here to share that the stories that we've been told our entire lives about what causes and ends poverty are completely wrong. The stories about welfare queens cheating the system, about hard work and bootstraps, about single saviors. These are the only stories most of us have heard all of our lives, but the data doesn't back them up. In fact, the data shows a very different picture about how poor policy choices have cheated families for decades. Madam Chair, members of the council, thank you for holding this hearing. Councilor Lara is not here, but I'm really thankful for her leadership in holding this hearing, to Mayor Wu and her team.
For the record, Councilor Lara just took a 1-minute break.
Chief Idaho for their leadership, and I'm heartened to hear that they don't have issues with the benefits of guaranteed income. What they're concerned about is scalability and sustainability. As I mentioned, I'm Jessica Ridge. I'm from Up Together. We're a national nonprofit. We are on a mission to ensure every person in this city and across the country is seen and invested in for their strengths and talents and can fulfill their dreams on their own terms. Up Together has been trusting and investing in people for more than 2 decades, 13 years here in Boston specifically. We've been working with community organizations, philanthropy, and governments, some of my partners here today, to get unrestricted cash, also often referred to as guaranteed income, to people, and then learn how they work with their community and use that cash to achieve their goals and financial security. Together, we have distributed more than $195 million in unrestricted cash to 200,000 people across this country since 2020. We do that through our proprietary payment platform, Up Together Connect. What does it mean to trust and invest in people? What happens when they have a guaranteed income? It means that Sanai, a mother of 3 in Roxbury, who received $500 a month through our Trust and Invest Collaborative, knew that with reliable income for 18 months, her transition from shelter to an apartment would be more stable, and she could finally complete the degree she had been putting on the back burner for 7 years. And she did get that degree. It means Lita, who received $500 a month for 18 months through our partnership with Cambridge Rise, no longer had to worry about running out of gas on the way to work. She finally had space and the funds to get therapy for her and her child, and she started reconnecting with her friends. It means Jennifer, a mother of a 10-year-old living in Boston, who only received $20 a month for 18 months and a $1,000 payment for survey completion in our Trust and Invest Collaborative, was able to tend to her credit card debt. She reflected on how she was spending money and noticed how the additional income affected her mood, and she continued to make a positive difference in her community. These stories are not unique. As was a little bit discussed with the last panel, there are now many studies across the country, including some of Up Together's, about the impact of unrestricted cash and guaranteed income on economic security and well-being. They all say pretty much the same thing. People who receive guaranteed income spend their money on basic needs. Their housing stability often increases, or at least they worry less about being evicted. In some cases, home ownership becomes possible. They also have more capacity to make progress on long-term goals they have been putting off. They often support others, and they're less stressed. And according to a study here in Boston, they also feel happier. And I think that's something for us to really think about. Not only reducing stress and relying on basic needs, but what actually happens when people feel happier and are able to connect with their friends. It doesn't have to be so hard for families. What's possible for our children when their parents feel happier and able to connect with their neighbors? What's possible when people don't have to worry about meeting basic needs or getting to work? What's possible for our city when people finally have the space to ideate about what they really want to do? I think it's pretty obvious. Our city will be stronger. It will be more creative. We'll have more people power to solve the challenges ahead, of which there's no shortage. And we don't have to have it all figured out right away. We can't make the other Sanais or Litas or Jennifers of our city wait while we find the perfect solution. We can act now, and we can plan for sustainability at the same time. In fact, investing in people now, that's how we figure out the long-term sustainability. That's what countless other cities around the country's philanthropists who've partnered with those cities, community organizations have done. That's what the city of Cambridge will talk about and has done. We have examples in the city of Austin. I also just want to say there is one place who has made this permanent. It's Multnomah County, Oregon. We can get more information for the council on that. But there's numerous cities and municipalities around the country that are on the pathway to permanence, but we have to start with something. And so I'll close by saying that Boston's absence in this now national guaranteed income effort is felt. We need Boston's talent, we need its resources and its grit. I know I'm biased. I lived and worked in this city for 19 years, 8 years in this council, for then City Councilor Anna Presley. It's neat to be on the other side of the chamber, but I can't imagine this effort being as successful if Boston isn't part of it. And so I'm hopeful we are here as an organization to roll up our sleeves, to share what we've learned, to make connections with other municipalities. We work very closely with the State Department of Transitional Assistance. Obtaining those kinds of waivers for folks who are in guaranteed income pilots is absolutely possible, especially when there's public-private partnerships. We can do that. That's not an insurmountable part. I think it'd be really neat to explore how the Boston Housing Authority could explore waivers for at least pilots that are happening in the city, whether they're through the city or not. It's something that the city of Cambridge has done. We can figure out we can figure out benefits cliffs. We have many, many examples of how we've done that here locally, but also across the country. And so I look forward to talking about that with everyone. Thank you for your time and your consideration. After everyone has spoken, I'm happy to take questions or whatever way you want to do that.
Thank you, Jessica. Josh?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to start by thanking you, Madam Chair, and the councilors that are here today. I recognize that giving people cash is a hot button topic, politically, socially, ethically, etc. I think I speak as a resident of Dorchester of 15 years after graduating from UMass Boston, working at a variety of nonprofits, and what I'm about to say is no slight to any of those organizations, but this work at Camp Harborview and this program has been the most impactful work of my career on people's lives, without question, unequivocally. I'm going to share a little bit about our program at Camp Harborview, and again, I'm happy to take questions after as well. You think camp, you think I'm not a camp counselor. I serve as the chief operating officer at Camp Harborview, but I work with camp counselors on Long Island and Boston Harbor, serving about 1,000 middle schoolers every summer for free. How did a camp get to guaranteed income? It's a good question. I ask myself that some days. It really came about during the pandemic. The Boston Fed released the Color of Wealth study in 2016 that exposed the sort of vast racial wealth gaps that, frankly, we all knew existed, but sort of provided the data to back that up. We were pulled into our office, myself and my colleague Lisa Fortenberry, who's in the audience today, by our founder and chairman, Jack Connors, and he said, this is unacceptable in the city of Boston. No more. So he said, you guys should get to work on this. We said, it's a 400-year problem or longer. What are we going to do? So we did what we always do. We went to our kids and we went to our families. We hired some consultants to conduct research, conduct hundreds of hours of interviews, hundreds of surveys on financial well-being, emotional and mental well-being of a household. And there was one thing that emerged from the data that was sort of unequivocal, which was if I just had a little bit extra cash, I might have a chance to pay those bills on time, to move my family to middle class, to buy a home, to do all those American things that we know every family in the city of Boston deserves a chance to do. So we called Jess. Jess had coffee. She jumped for joy. Lisa and Jess and I had coffee, and we said we want to launch a program. And we based it on a couple of factors. One was we actually focused on families that fell just above the poverty line. So families in our program fell in an income bracket of $43,000 a year to $103,000 a year. We also decided, we did some calculations on what would it cost to cover some basic food expenses for a household of 3 or 4 people, and utility bills for a household of 3 or 4 people. And we came to an amount of about $600 a month in unrestricted cash. And that if we could offset that for that specific population, their disposable income would increase. And from there, what would increase? Wealth building and all the things that could sort of provide that pathway to the middle class for those families. So 2 years ago, we launched a pilot program in partnership with UMass Boston. We enrolled 50 families in a payment group. We also selected 50 families in a control group. Families that we would study, both the payment group and the control group, to understand the financial impacts and the emotional and mental impacts of the money they were receiving, or in the case of the control group, not receiving. We worked with an external evaluator to design an extensive evaluation using the Kessler 10 to evaluate sort of household well-being, but also evaluating things like household savings, debt, et cetera, all these sort of mechanisms of wealth building that we know to be true. I think I'm proud to say that, no surprise, it worked. Some sort of snippets of data that I'll share. 53% of our control group reports, again, the money, the group not receiving the money reported increased emotional stress in the household. The group receiving the money reported a 30% decrease in emotional stress in the household. The group in the payment group reported being able to pay their bills on time at a 25% greater rate than the people not receiving the money. Savings increased in the payment group by nearly 60%. They decreased in the non-payment group by 45%. I could go on and on. But perhaps the most profound story, or stories that we can tell, are the ones when you can look across the table at a family and say, this is cash, and you can spend it as you see fit. And then at the end of that pilot, for those families to come back, which we did a couple of months ago at the end of it, and say, I bought a home. I just needed to save for a down payment. I paid off my utility bill. I invested in stocks. I made all the right decisions to move my family forward, which is, for Camp Harborview, what has made this a very, very powerful body of work, and one that we are going to move to permanency in the coming years by continuing this program beginning in January 2024.
Thank you. I was so captivated. The timer didn't even matter. And then I thought there was more, and then there wasn't. What an amazing program. Sounds great. I can't wait to hear more about it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Allison?
I'm actually going to have my colleague Michael go first.
Michael, you have the floor.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Madam Chair, and all the city councilors for having us here today. We're really excited to be talking about this, and I'm going to try to be brief. As I said, my name is Michael Scarlett. I am Mayor Siddiqui's Chief of Staff just across the river in Cambridge. And in my role over the last 2 years or so, I've helped lead our guaranteed income programs, including our recent $22 million expansion that's providing about 2,000 families a month, 2,000 families $500 a month. And I'll get into that a little bit more in detail momentarily. But like I said a second ago, I'll try to just stick to the details of our program and how we expanded, and let some of the other speakers talk about why it's so important and some of the impacts of research. Similarly to Camp Harborview during the pandemic, was when Mayor Siddiqui first started the Mayor's Disaster Relief Fund, which is a pool of private money that basically allows the city to give residents cash directly. And usually it's used in the case of a fire or a flood to help a resident recover from that disaster. But when COVID hit, it was used to help families with one-time payments to mitigate the impacts of COVID. And the feedback from people who received that money was that it was a lifeline, and they really appreciated the flexibility that the cash provided them. And it also, I should note, that it showed residents how much the government trusted them to make the right decisions for their family. And again, it was that flexibility that I think was really powerful for families who had never experienced that before. So the following year, Mayor Siddiqui was connected to the organization Mayors for Guaranteed Income, which was helping cities across the country start pilot programs. And it was sort of a no-brainer for her to try to start one in Cambridge. But due to the anti-aid amendment, the money used in the pilot needed to be privately raised. And so we worked together with the Cambridge Community Foundation and Up Together to raise the money and to start a relatively small pilot in the city for about 130 families. Each of those families received $500 a month for 18 months, but it was pretty quickly into the pilot that we started to look at options to expand into a larger program. And I think something that was mentioned earlier was it can take a lot of time for the data to come in and to sort of sift through what worked, what didn't work. And we had decided pretty quickly that anecdotally what we were hearing from families, this was clearly working in the way that we wanted it to, which was giving families a tool to respond to the pandemic that had hardened them in a negative way. So it was a pretty easy decision to try to expand, and we started looking at ways to improve on the pilot program. And we took a couple of big lessons from the initial smaller program, and one of them was we wanted it to be as accessible and simple as possible, open to all residents, and really have as few barriers in between the residents and access to this program. The second was increased benefit mitigation. So with 130 families, it was pretty easy to ensure that benefits were mitigated, but for a much larger program, it was going to be a lot more work to go through all of the programs that families were enrolled in and make sure that the $500 a month did not push them out of those programs. And then finally, the biggest goal was to design the program in a way that did not include a lottery. So for the pilots, families have to apply and only some will get in. But for this program, we wanted to ensure that every single family that was eligible would have access to these funds. So we worked for about 8 months on program design with the Cambridge Community Foundation and the Cambridge Economic Opportunity Committee, which is the anti-poverty agency in Cambridge. And this partnership worked really well for us because CEOC is the on-the-ground anti-poverty agency that works really closely with these families. And the foundation helped to sort of take the longer-term view and ensure that these programs were forward-thinking and creative. So we landed on the following, which is families in Cambridge with at least one child, 21 years old or younger, making under 250% of the federal poverty limit would all access this program. We had to work with the demographer to ensure we knew how much this would cost, and it came out to about $22 million. We had a 2-month application window and received 1,930 eligible applications. So we had about a 95% uptake rate, which we were really excited about because it showed that our outreach was good. We had the application translated into 8 languages. We had about 30 in-person events during those 2 months that the application was open. And we worked really closely with all of our community partners to make sure the word got out. So we're about to send out the 5th round of checks. The program has been really successful so far, and we've been hearing from other cities around Massachusetts asking for advice for starting their own programs. So we're excited, and we believe that in the near future we'll be seeing more guaranteed income programs sprouting up around Massachusetts. So I'll stop there and pass it back to Allison.
Thank you. Allison, do you have the floor?
Wonderful. Good afternoon, and thank you, Madam Chair and members of the council for having us here today. As I said before, my name is Allison Kroner-Barron, and I am the Rise Up Research Project Director for Cambridge Community Foundation. As the first citywide non-lottery guaranteed basic income program of its kind, Rise Up Cambridge is in a unique position to learn from family experiences to identify and design what continued support for low-income families should look like in the future. As Michael shared, cross-sector collaboration has been incredibly important to our effort and will continue to be important moving forward. We would not be in this exciting position without the hard work of our partners like the City of Cambridge, Cambridge Economic Opportunity Committee, Up Together, and the support of foundation donors like Harvard and MIT, and a whole host of private individuals who were especially critical in getting the funds needed to launch that initial pilot, therefore allowing for a citywide expansion after that. Each partner is committed to finding ways to continue support for Rise Up families after the program is slated to end in early 2025. In fact, Cambridge Community Foundation's recently launched 5-year strategic plan is closely intertwined with Rise Up, focusing on maintaining the gains that families in Cambridge will make with the Rise Up funds. We know that the system for low-income families is broken. The federal poverty level is too low. Income limits for benefits and associated cliff effects keep people stuck in poverty, in essence penalizing people for income increases. And as Jess spoke to, we don't trust low-income families the way we trust families in other income brackets. Both the stories our society tells about low-income families and our policies undermine their agency. As a result, we're constantly trying to find workarounds to help people experiencing poverty. When put into place as a complement to existing benefits, guaranteed basic income programs represent an opportunity to put families in control again. Rise Up Cambridge is the first citywide non-lottery cash assistance program of its kind, presenting us with a rare opportunity to learn and then translate those learnings into action. Nearly every household, as Michael explained, under 250% of the federal poverty level in Cambridge has enrolled. This gives us the opportunity to learn about how families of different racial and ethnic backgrounds, sizes, household compositions, neighborhoods, and income levels use this cash to improve their lives. With our research, we're going beyond asking a simple yes or no question, does GBI help families? As Jessica explained in her remarks, previous research demonstrates that the answer is yes. Instead, we are looking at how families use the cash and how it affects outcomes like economic mobility, health and well-being, and educational attainment. And we're looking at how those outcomes vary across families with different characteristics. Our research is also designed to engage and empower Cambridge families and centers racial equity. We are engaging a research advisory council made up of 12 Cambridge residents and partners, and our research team has hired 3 local residents to serve as members of the research team throughout the length of the project. A special shout out to both Up Together and Cambridge Economic Opportunity Committee for sharing their wisdom on how to best engage with families and residents in this way. Our research will use a mix of qualitative and quantitative methods with a heavy emphasis on deep narratives to allow room for family voices to take center stage. Moreover, Cambridge Community Foundation is committed to engaging our wider Cambridge community in making sense of and taking action based off what we learn. Rise Up Cambridge just launched this summer, but with this research, we are already focusing on how we're going to translate what we learn into changes in policy and practice to continue to support economic mobility and agency for low-income families in the future. We are thankful for the partners leading on Rise Up to date and for other GBI providers across the Commonwealth who are aligned on figuring out how to ensure long-term support for families. Even with those solid partnerships, however, we know we need more partners across the state and region to bring long-term change in policy and practice to support families. We are thrilled that Boston is considering a GBI program and look forward to collaborating however we can. And I appreciate your time and am available for questions.
Thank you, Allison. I think we only have 2 people who signed up for public testimony, Mary Ann and Abby, and 3 on Zoom. Thank you, and 1 on Zoom. If you can make your way down to the mic, please. And if we can ready Portia, and then we'll go straight to our council colleagues for questions. Marianne?
Thank you.
Introduce yourself and affiliation, residence, for the record, and then your testimony. You have 2 minutes.
My name's Marianne Bullock. I'm Senior Manager of the East Coast with UpTogether.org. I work with Jess. I'm a city councilor in Greenfield, Massachusetts, so I truly mean it. Thank you for your service. And I was born in Dorchester, lived in Quincy my whole life until I had kids and then moved out to the western part of the state. So Boston is my home. I'm going to start with asking you all a question. What would you do if you knew for a fact that next month you'd get an extra $500? Not a credit or a voucher, but cash that you could spend on whatever you wanted, no strings attached. And you knew that this money would come no matter what, even if your kids were sick and you lost work. And you knew that you would get this money every single month for the next 2 years. The money was guaranteed. How would you live your life differently? Some of us in this room maybe wouldn't do anything differently. Maybe you have a salary that you know is protected. You can take leave if you need to, if a family member gets sick. You know your paycheck is coming and that every week pretty much looks the same for you. So you don't need to do anything differently with that money. But to others, that really sounds unreal. Maybe you work a job where you do worry about your hours getting cut, where you can't take time off if you get sick. Maybe you care for someone you love and so you can't work a lot, or you do work a lot and you work really, really hard, but you don't make enough. So $500 is a sure bet that the choices you make, the dreams you pursue, your life would look different if your money was guaranteed every month. I'll tell you what my brain does when I'm asked about that. I have a teenager who's about to go to college next year. I'd put $500 away for her to have some money because we weren't in a position to save for a college fund for her. I'd pay my student loans off. I could knock them out in 2 years with $500 a month. That'd be great. Inevitably, things would pop up, right? We need snow tires, maybe a new set of brakes on my car. But you get the point. What we do when we're asked what we do with $500 is we take care of our families. We do things to make our families more secure. For the past 3 years while I've been at Up Together, I've seen families answer these questions for themselves. I've often pushed my own boundaries around the narratives that I've had around poverty that surprised me because I grew up in a low-income working class family. I know my family worked hard. And more often than not, when I tell people what I do, even my own dad, and why I believe so surely in guaranteed income, people ask, well, what if? What if people don't spend it on their families? What if they buy drugs? What if they buy a new pair of shoes? My answer is, what if giving people cash directly is actually the thing that provides security for them? What if the security of knowing that you have $500 a month coming in means better measures of health and well-being, not just for you, but your entire family? And those measures extend into your community as well. Because I know that this is what happens when we give people money from my work for the last 3 years. There's a whole bunch of researchers doing analysis about what happens when we give people guaranteed income, and we've worked with them. We partnered with the DTA and 1,500 members of the Trust and Invest Collaborative in the city of Boston, as well as 9 family evaluators who lived throughout the city in a randomized control trial to better understand how investing in families with the highest need in the city increases security, increases health and well-being, reduces depression, and changes people's lives. All the members of the Trust and Invest Collaborative were living on incomes below the federal poverty level. Nearly half of them earned around $1,000 a month. These are family members with at least one adult with a child in the home. The median rent in Boston for a studio apartment is more than double that. What I can tell you is that I learned that the current solutions we have to support families
that are working extraordinarily hard are inadequate. People know what they need, and when we provide them with investment, they invest in their families and their security over and over again.
Thank you.
The current reality for Massachusetts is that every part of the system we have in place to support families is at a breaking point, and we need something better. And it's giving people cash and letting them decide what security looks like in their own lives.
Councilor Bullock, will 30 seconds be okay for you to wrap up?
The good news is it's not as hard as it sounds. We've been doing this every day at Up Together. The solution is investing in people directly with a basic guaranteed income for families that need it and are best equipped to answer the question, what would you do with $500 a month? Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. We appreciate your service. Abby Holland?
Yes, hello, my name's Abby Holland. I'm here with Camp Harborview. I'm proud to be the Guaranteed Income Program Coordinator at Camp Harborview, and for the past year I've been supporting families from our community across Boston who received $583 per month through our pilot program. I've seen the power and lasting positive impact of Guaranteed Income in our community through my role, and Guaranteed Income has been an opportunity for us to build trust with families, giving them the power to make the best decisions for themselves. Through just the 2 years of the pilot, families have reached incredible milestones because of the monthly guaranteed income, like buying their first home, paying off all of their debt, sending their kids to college, working one less job, spending more time with their family, and just overall finding a greater sense of stability. As a resident of Boston and in my role through CHV, I want to see our city put this trust and investment in families in our city, and we should aim to uplift the families that would benefit most from a guaranteed income. This work is well researched and we know that it works, so it's time for Boston to join this movement. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abby. Portia, can you hear us?
I can hear you guys. Thank you so much. My name is Portia Abrams. I'm a family partner with Up Together. I'm also on the evaluation team, and just this whole experience has been absolutely amazing. The feedback that I did receive while being on the evaluation team from all the participants was just like, it was breathtaking, because it just gave me a sense. I felt like I was doing something good, helping out, because they were so appreciative of what was being done for them. And just to kind of turn it back on me, I was in a situation where, the extra income was super helpful, because I have 2 kids and, I've been out of work for some time. I do have a part-time job because it's kind of been tough finding a job that offers mother hours. So just having that extra income just to supplement that has been extremely amazing. But also, just providing the time that I am able to spend with my kids, that's truly good. But, just being able to, not have to worry so much. That's the biggest relief that I've received. So now I'm in school for grant writing and just, trying to place my family in a better position.
Thank you so much, Ms. Abrams. We'll go straight to Councilor Lara if you have your questions, and then for the remaining councilors.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the panelists, not only for being here today, but for all of the work that you're doing. I think I am a very strong believer that poverty is a policy choice, and in the ways that as a city we have failed, you are stepping in the gap and standing in the gap for these families. So I'm really grateful for that. And the outcomes and the stories that you are sharing are inspiring, and they're motivating to me. I have a couple of questions. One, I want to hear from Cambridge. If I'm hearing correctly, you said that you've expanded the program, that now it's at $22 million. I want to hear a little bit about the capital stack, if you may, of how you're funding the $22 million. I was in philanthropy before I became an elected official, and so I know that there's a lot of financial resources there. There are lots of conversations happening in philanthropy about getting big foundation to spend down more than 5% of their endowment, and how do we stop people from hoarding financial resources and really putting them back. And so I'm curious about what the diversity is of the people who are funding, you know, where you're getting the $22 million from, but also what some of your fundraising tactics and stories were in order to get us to $22 million. And I also heard, and this might be for Camp Harborview or for Up Together, about some of the benefit cliffs, and that there were some very clear interventions that you worked in there to make sure that families weren't being negatively impacted by receiving an increased income. And so I want to hear about those as well, and anybody can go first.
I can start on the funding question. So for the pilot, the $1.7 million was entirely privately raised, and that was a mix of institutional players in Cambridge and working with the foundation to raise that money. And I should also note the foundation did contribute financially to the pilot. The program that is currently underway is entirely American Rescue Plan funds. So I don't actually know if I need to elaborate on that for now, no. But yeah, American Rescue Plan, and I guess the only other thing I'll note is that there's a lot of talk earlier about ensuring that something is permanent and doesn't create a drop-off at the end. And I think, as Allison mentioned, we're actively looking at how to expand, but certainly did not want to let that question get in the way of starting the program. And I think the fact that we went from a pilot to a program to something that we're not quite certain what it's going to look like, the momentum's still in the right direction, and so certainly did not want to wait around wondering what's going to happen at the end just to get started.
And I think if I can add on to that, another important part of the cross-sector collaboration here, especially in this new expansion, is our partnership with Cambridge Economic Opportunity Committee. They're working closely with all the families who've signed up. It's nearly 2,000, or the individuals who've signed up, nearly 2,000, representing about 6,000 individuals in Cambridge. And they have offered families a variety of ways to receive additional wraparound services. And those will really be focused on helping families begin to prepare for the end of payments long before they start. Like Michael said, all the partners are really focused on building the bridge for after the program and figuring out what that's going to look like. We're going to be leveraging the research and anecdotal data and findings from the pilot, which will come out in around February, March, to do that. But in the meantime, we're also making sure that families are beginning to plan for that end. And as a community in Cambridge, we're making sure that the net is there. That's something the foundation's really focused on with our 5-year strategic plan, but the city and on the ground partners too.
Yeah, one of the things that we worked into the proposal from the internal coalition here at City Hall was the ability for people to tap into more monthly resources by attending these extra classes, whether it be financial management, educational classes. Those we didn't want to, one, reinforce the narrative that people are poor because they have bad financial management, but we also didn't want to make them mandatory. And so we worked in the ability to get an extra $100, another extra $250 by attending and doing, basically accessing some of the wraparound services. And so it's really encouraging to hear that they've been impactful in Cambridge as well. Thank you. Yep.
Anymore? Oh, there it is. Thanks, Jane. Yeah, I think the city of Cambridge is a really interesting example. They've taken a particular pathway, and we have different pathways that are happening across the country. I'll lift up one other city that is in some ways comparable to Boston. That's the city of Boston, and they started out similarly in terms of giving one-time cash payments in the middle of COVID, at the time using CARES Act dollars, but then they implemented a pilot. How they funded that is a little opaque, but they have since put in money into their line item in the city council for that. There are
so it's in their city budget.
It's in their city budget now. there are barriers in this state with the anti-amendment that we have to look at, and we have cities and towns across the Commonwealth that are getting involved, and I think that Boston lending its expertise and its might would be helpful. So I just want to be clear and reiterate for the record that I think we hold ourselves back and we hold families back if we're waiting. Clearly, Councilor Lara, this is on your mind as well, but just for the record, waiting for the right one perfect answer isn't going to get us there. And the other thing that was sort of dropping in when you were speaking, Councilor, is, and as this conversation has been happening, is we can think about families as vulnerable. And certainly the situations that we have put families in because of the policy choices we have made over decades is one of vulnerability. And what we've seen in some of the stories that I've shared and that Camp Harborview and Cambridge is aware of is that really what it's about is this stress that people endure when they don't know if they can put food on the table, when they don't know if their hours are going to get cut at work, if they don't know, or a health condition happens. And when that's taken away and there's some stability and funds coming in, it opens up a whole lot and it makes more space for people's talent and creativity. So I'd like to think about this as a movement away from vulnerability towards tapping into the genius that exists in this city, and how can we center that? And I really think that's an important way for us to think about it. In terms of benefits cliffs, it's a real challenge. It's why we're all in the work that we're doing. Part of the reason that families are in the places that they're in are because of the cliffs. It's pretty common for folks to be working, be offered an opportunity to expand their job, they get a promotion where they're working, and that then cuts their child care voucher off or impacts their benefits. They're actually just in a choice, of a really terrible choice of, do I take this promotion and actually earn less income because of the other benefits that then go away, namely child care. And so it's a bit of a quagmire we have to work through as we're trying to change the system, but countless cities across the country have figured out, private organizations as well, and we can do it. We've done it here in Massachusetts, and the Department of Transitional Assistance has been a really fabulous partner and can do that.
Yeah, I think I would just add, Councilor Lara, you asked about benefits cliff. I think I addressed this, but we very much stayed away from families that fell sort of in that poverty, below the poverty line, if you will. So that was very much by design, because what we learned from it, particularly from the Camp Harborview families that we partner with, was that it was that CNA who works nights with 2 kids that wasn't eligible for benefits, but that would make significant impact. Those dollars would have a significant impact on their ability to move forward. So that was we stayed away from that in general. Obviously, it's a non-taxable gift, et cetera, through the ever-changing tax code. The one thing that I would sort of build on what my colleagues have said is I think there's a bit of a misguided narrative about philanthropy and their ability or their desire to invest in this. I think I can speak for all my colleagues in saying this. We were pretty nervous about going public with this. We have we're almost entirely privately funded, foundations, wealthy individuals, et cetera, and not one of them has walked away from Camp Harborview. In fact, our revenue has actually gone the other way in launching this pilot. So I think as we begin to think about permanency in our work, we wouldn't be talking about permanency at Camp Harborview without that level of support and generosity from some very wealthy individuals and institutions that have supported us and continued to support us. Because I think people want to solve problems. I think they're sick of seeing the same over and over and over again. And so when you present an evidence-based practice like this that can move the needle, frankly, very quickly for families, 2 years is not a lot of time to move a family from debt to home ownership. Philanthropy gets actually excited, at least the donors and institutions that we work with. So we're excited about where it's going.
As a former development director, It's always good to be able to say, this is what your money's going to do. And when you have such a clear impact, it's very easy to fundraise, right? It's very easy to ask people to give to something when you have a very clear outcome. Thank you all. I don't have any other further questions, but I do want to answer the counselor's question from the public testimony, because it came up for me when you said, these families that are maybe not eligible, that are like kind of not eligible for public. And I thought about my family. I said, what would I do if I had an extra $500, right? Somebody who's not eligible for anything. And I thought about my son. I have a 7-year-old who's autistic, who's nonverbal, and I'm like, I would pay for private therapy. I would get him, you know what I mean? I would get him a speech therapist. And then secondarily, I would pay off some student loans. So thinking about even families who maybe are not living, I know we're talking about a guaranteed basic income, and we're talking about targeting people who are living below the poverty line, right? We're talking about the people who are most vulnerable. I am a believer in a universal basic income, and that is the reason why I'm a believer in a universal basic income, because the difference that it makes for a parent being able to say that they're going to quit their job and stay at home with their child, the difference that it makes for somebody to say, my kid is off to college, I actually have something to say and I want to take time off to write a book, how does it change the cultural fabric and the well-being of our society when everybody can kind of live to their full potential? And so it was an important question to pose, and I want to say thank you to the counselor for posing it, and thank you all for all the work that you do. No further questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Lujan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think I have any questions. I just want to say thank you. Jessica, thank you for being back in chambers. Thank you for the work that you're doing. And Camp Harborview, I'm not recalling your name at the moment, but I think you're the first one who started talking about this in terms of stress reduction, and I think a lot about in terms of a framework for me in terms of the role of government and our role, my role here, city. How do we reduce or remove the stress that people experience every day in their lived journeys here? And we're talking about folks, poor folks, working class folks. A lot of it is about money and jobs that aren't paying a living wage, that aren't keeping up with the cost of rent. And so I just thank you for introducing that, talking about the emotional stress and how this really is responsive to that. So that's all. Just thank you. And thank you to the City of Cambridge for pioneering and for being part of this work. And Mayor Siddiqui, I know I was very excited when she got this off the ground. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Lujan. I guess when I think about universal or just guaranteed basic income, I think about in terms of the study that Boston Public Health Commission has put out after racism was declared a public health crisis here in Boston. And thereafter, I think there was a study in terms of how social determinants of health, or improving our social determinants of health, can actually be a guide to improving or getting us out of poverty. And there was a lot of interesting pointers there about how poverty had a direct correlation with gang violence, or just violence, gun violence in our communities, and how that was a direct, or the causation was systemic racism. And so when we think about, who this impacts and how we do the work, I really appreciated that you specifically, Allison, and all of you, in terms of how thoughtful you've been. You mentioned this is a 400-year, Josh, you mentioned 400-year problem, and then you talked about, in terms of policy, how to be inclusive of those impacted. And I know that considering, Jessica, I don't think we've met, but considering where you worked, you know the famous speech that resonates with us from our own Congresswoman. And so I think about how Cambridge has actually been very thoughtful. Cambridge and Somerville alike have been very thoughtful in terms of equity. Basic income, guaranteed basic income, is essentially equity done right. And if you look at the different levels, then we're not talking about just those who are making between 43 and 103. And by the way, we qualify for your program. And I think Councilor Bullock there appreciates that as well. And so when you're that thoughtful, as Councilor Lara mentioned, this has been extremely holistic in your approach in terms of looking at it from a perspective of not just folks that are or qualify for welfare benefits, but lower middle class. But also, I think we should also think about those who are historically disenfranchised in the middle class position as well, and how to get to wealth, right? And as we're thinking about policies, as we're thinking about figuring out the qualifiers and moving forward, I don't see why, I agree with Councilor Lujan, I don't see why where there's a will, there's a way. Boston being one of the richest, or if not the most richest city in the country, we definitely have the means. And so I thank you for setting precedents, for putting the work forward, and hopefully collaborating with you. I looked to Cambridge and Somerville when I filed for a hearing order to discuss equity in the budget, and considering that you had used RISE in your government to basically evaluate as metrics to how to get out of poverty. And so this is a program that basically a doctor from Harvard had came out and created this program called RISE, and as metrics to measure how to measure to get people out of poverty. And essentially it's working in Somerville, and Cambridge has been implementing metrics. So I really just appreciate it to look to you as examples to work along with you. I'm not sure where the conversation is in terms of the next step, or I leave it to obviously the lead sponsor, Councilor Lara, for whether or not we'll be reconvening or we'll be taking this to administration to work behind the scenes, but we'll certainly invite you back to the table. Wanted to leave you an opportunity for you to make any last statements before I close, if you have any.
I have a thought. Thank you for naming equity, Counselor. I think there's a lot of different ways that some of the partners we're working with are looking at that in terms of how they determine who to focus on. And I agree, there's a lot of different ways we can focus, and we actually are working with a couple of community foundations in Connecticut who are focusing on community leaders, folks who are doing work to shift policies in their communities in an unpaid capacity, while also often working multiple jobs, taking care of loved ones, living in and out of housing security, and what would it look like if we invested in them for a guaranteed basic income, and what might become possible not only in their individual lives, but in terms of the policy landscape within the city. So there's literally limitless ways that we can think about this together, and there's something really impactful. Just, I think, Josh, you started to touch on it by just saying, we trust you, and people like fully receiving that, what that does, because we've been indoctrinated and grown up in this system that has said and acted in completely opposite ways. I think it's really exciting. Chief Idaho talked about it a little bit, that there is a difference in terms of the conversations that's happening in Boston, around the country about this, that would have been very different really before COVID. And so that's important to note. And it's going to take a lot of creative talent and brain power. And so I hope, I typically don't, sometimes task forces are not used well in government, but I actually think putting a lot of people together in a room across sectors to solve this, and across cities, would be a really valuable thing to do while we're also making investments in people's lives. So I hope that's something that the city can consider. We'd be happy to be part of that.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah, I think I would thank you for putting this together, and I think count us as a Camp Harborview as an ongoing partner in this work. Like I said, we're prepared to make this a permanent part of what we do at Camp Harborview. I think in the city, you hear the equity term sort of thrown around a lot, right? And to be honest, my ancestors didn't go through what some of the ancestors of people in this room went through. And this is as much about, and as easy as making that investment to say it's time to pay it back. Like this is, and it's a solution that works. And so when I hear, not necessarily members of this council, but people say, where's the evidence, or that even earlier that there were preliminary findings. The findings are there across the country. This isn't rocket science. Cash works. We hear the term reparations thrown around. This is a version of that works to level the playing field for people in our city and in this country. So I hope the conversation continues, and please count us among those that want to be a part of it.
Interesting. What goes with that, I see you, Allison, in terms of where the facts, the evidence is there, right? But also the candidates are there. The people that are best qualified are there as well. And so I don't, every time I say stuff like that, I remember Congresswoman now that you're sitting there, I don't know the quote, but something about being closest to pain and being closest to power. And so when you think about that, the people who are closest to pain, but I'll say it, Black people, Black women are the best qualified to change this world. Absolutely, bar none. Like, you cannot argue that anywhere you go. And I dare to say it on record anywhere I go. And so it is what it is. And we should probably humble ourselves a little and learn from those who have those experiences, who are best qualified. Thank you so much for saying that.
Actually builds perfectly into what I was going to say, which is when you think about starting a task force or whatever the next step is in starting to flesh this out, is how are we centering the voices of potential families, women, a variety of representatives from the different populations you might think about targeting. If going universal is not a feasible first step, that's really, I think, such a critical part of how you center equity, is get those voices in the room. That's something we're really working on in Cambridge, and figuring out, how do we do that in a way that is respectful of folks' time? How do we compensate people for their time? How do we tap into existing listening sessions that are happening? And how do we, once we get results, bring those results to our community and have them help us interpret them, so that it's not just a couple people in a room saying, yes, this is right. So just wanted to echo that, and also say that Cambridge is also excited to collaborate. So please feel free to reach back out.
Thank you.
I would just echo that, and I think, like I mentioned earlier, a number of cities have reached out to us and are trying to work on their own programs. And I think now that we've gotten ours off the ground, no need to recreate the wheel. All of the questions that counselors were asking earlier, they're important questions, but I think those are the ones we've been answering over the last year, and we'd love to be helpful in the process, whether it's benefit mitigation, program design. I think certainly don't want to let some of those complicated questions get in the way of moving forward, because they can certainly all be answered, and we'd love to be helpful in that regard.
Final thing I'll say before giving my council colleague the final word. I really appreciated that you took it from, and you were intentional in saying from pilot, then to program, then who knows, evolution, because you look at just programmatic practices in local government. And sometimes you really have to question. When I first got here, I would always say to people, is that a policy, a program, or a practice, or just a stupid rule? Like, what is it? And so I really appreciate that your optimism in saying, look, there's an opportunity here, it evolves, and we'll find a way. Thank you. Councilor Lara.
Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you so much to the chair, Councilor Anderson, for making this hearing happen in very short order. It is, as most of you know, I'm pretty soon and very quickly on my way out of the City Council, and it has been it has been my pleasure to work on this, and I'm very happy that I got to have this hearing before. If it is one of the last things that I do, I'm very proud, and I hope that we can continue supporting the City of Boston in making this a reality. Our families, they are worth it. They're worth the investment. Our people are worth the investment. Our communities are worth the investment. And you all are very much examples of what happens when you see that and you take action. When I worked at Resist, we had a list of organizational principles. And as a grant-making organization, trust is always something that we have to grapple with, based on how we're writing applications, what information we're asking people for, and so on and so forth. And one of the principles that we did our best to live on is trust the people and they'll become trustworthy. And that is something that we inherited from Adrienne Marie Brown's Emergent Strategy book. And so it's really beautiful to hear you talk about trusting families and what that trust has yielded in a world where Black and brown people, low-income people, poor people are not being trusted. They're not being given the opportunity to be, the beneficiaries of their own brilliance and to have, the architects of their lives. That a basic income as a form of trust, as an act of reparations, has this kind of transformative impact for these families. So I'm really grateful. I continue to be inspired by you all, and thank you.
With that, I look forward to continuing, hopefully, what becomes Councilor Lara's legacy. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.